Hello everybody and welcome. So today I'm going to be talking to you guys about some equipment, how I set up the equipment, and as well as just talk about some brands and some different things I've tried that have been really helpful in setting up my high-tech planet aquariums. The first thing to really consider is going to be your soil. Soil is one of the most important parts because, especially when doing these aquascapes, having a good substrate layer for your plants is very important. We'll get a better angle of the soil. There we go. Typically, I like to use the ADA brand Aqua Soil. This is available on Amazon. It's a very good, high-quality substrate. That was a 9-liter bag. I think those were about $50, give or take, which can be pretty expensive. For the small tanks, I think I used maybe not even like half a bag of the 9-liter, and that's like with a nice, decent-sized slope in the back. What's really nice about this soil is it kind of covers everything. It's really good, top quality. I don't have to worry about doing root tabs or fertilizers or adding anything else into the substrate. So good quality, definitely recommend it. Pretty easy to use. It does release some ammonia for, I think it's like the first 3 weeks or so. It'll actually release ammonia to establish your filter media, get the bacteria going. So keep that in mind. If you're going to add fish early into a tank, you might have to do more water changes to kind of compensate for the ammonia coming out of the soil. Because I'm pretty sure it did that, like at least 80% sure that that's what it does. Go on to some next things. Go on to the next thing. We're the lights. There's a lot of bad aquarium lights. There are definitely some brands I recommend. Finex is a really good brand, good multi-purpose style lighting that's really nice. I'm going to be trying out one on my 55. We'll see how it does. For this one, I'm using a Flexi Mini LED. What's really nice about this light, it's pretty simple. It just rotates. It's really thin. It's small, good for nano tanks like this. No cool features. It just turns on and off. Pretty basic, really nice. It's been growing these plants for about a month and a half. A lot of new growth on these dwarf baby tiers as well as the AR minis. So definitely recommend it. Now I'm going to talk a bit about the CO2 and how I set the CO2 up. The CO2 is probably what most people consider to be the hard part. So especially if you're brand new into this, there's some things I really recommend looking into. So here's the CO2 canister. These CO2 canisters, you can use paint. The CO2 canister that you have or you want to use, you need to make sure you get a regulator that's compatible with it. So we'll go ahead and talk about that first. I like to use the Aquatech CO2 regulators. They're reasonably expensive. You can do more DIY style CO2. It's definitely much cheaper. What's nice about this is that it's very easy to use. This regulator, it just uses the electric current to just turn on and off. So you can hook it up to timers, you can do all that stuff. There's no, yeast mixing or anything, and it's compatible with paintball CO2 canisters. Which is nice because I can find these at like a Dick's Sporting Goods in like the outdoor section. You might be able to get these in other places. It's going to kind of depend on what's available to you. For me, this is what I was able to find. This is what was readily available. It's not super expensive to get these refilled either, and they last a long time, which is really nice. A lot of good features with that. You just turns a little knob, you turn it once and you're done. Fluval does make their own CO2 regulators. They don't use an electric current though. So what that means, if it doesn't have that, you have to turn this knob on and off every day, which is very tedious and annoying. And I would definitely recommend just when you can plug in like this. So the next thing you're really going to want is going to be the brass or like a check valve. I like to use the Rhinox brass check valve. This is also available on Amazon as well as the regulator. Very important to point out, links to all of these products will be in the description. This is what you put on next with your CO2 system. So typically you have like one line of airline tube, which is like your entire CO2 like thing. It's like this is the regulator. You attach it here, and then you go straight into the tank. So what I do is you cut the hose, you put this in between the airline tubing. It doesn't matter where, just put this next, like before anything else. You don't want to have this in the water, but you want to make sure that if you have any other equipment for your CO2 system, it goes on after the check valve. So it goes regulator, check valve, then anything else. And I'll talk about those in a second. The check valve is really great. It makes sure you don't blast CO2 into your tank. It's pretty simple. It works very, very well. It's small, so it's not overly cumbersome. It's good for the small nano tanks. It's really, I'd recommend it for anyone that's new into the high-tech tanks, because it can be pretty easy to blast CO2 into your tank, and it'll just go, instead of going through the check valve, it goes straight through the tube to your diffuser. The diffuser just kind of explode into pieces. This one actually happened, like all the components like broke off, and we were able to get them reattached, but it's not ideal. You can really break some stuff doing that if you're not careful. So definitely recommend it. There are other brands. This one's just small. It's simple. There's no complicated things. It just comes in that little bag. It's no real maintenance required on it. It's really nice. So next, after you put your CO2 check valve, typically what you'll add after that is a bubble counter. The bubble counter can be nice. It's kind of a good way to see, if you're getting enough CO2 in your tank, or, just so you can kind of compare to other people's tanks, because usually they'll say they're doing like 4 bubbles a second or 5 bubbles a second or something like that. So you can kind of compare, see where you might need to be. It's just kind of a good way to approximate how much CO2 you're going to want going into your tank. There are other accurate ways of telling how much CO2 is in your tank. I will talk about those. CO2 bubble counters can come separate. Mine is actually in my diffuser, which is the next thing. This is at the very end of your CO2 line, and that's your diffuser. The diffuser is basically what turns the giant bubbles into little bubbles that will just be, dissolved into your tank. It's pretty simple. This is the bubble counter. You can see bubble, bubble, bubble. It just kind of does that. I can turn up the CO2, and it will, the bubbles will increase and more CO2 will come out. It works really well. It's nice to have it in the diffuser, especially for these small tanks where it can be hard to try and fit in all this equipment. You can get them separately. Usually they'll come with things you can attach on the outside of the glass and all that kind of stuff. But this has worked really well for me. It's kind of nice. The bubble counters, probably recommend it. You don't necessarily have to have it. But for your first tank, I'd probably recommend doing it just, so you cover all of the basics. You have, you don't have to buy something else, have it shipped in to make sure you're doing something right. Next, diffusers. Diffusers, there's a lot of brands. There's a lot of different models, and they all pretty much do about the exact same thing. The only difference is some may come with bubble counters, some won't. Some might be easy to clean, some won't. This one is actually unscrews in several different places, so it's easy to clean, which is very, very nice, because you can see actually you can't, because there's a ton of glare on the top of that thing, which is okay, because it actually makes the thing look a lot cleaner than it actually is. Let's see. There we go. Now you can kind of see it a bit better. There's a ton of glare on that. But basically there's a bunch of algae growing in on that ceramic disc, which is what kind of diffuses the CO2 a bit into small bubbles. Fluval has a good brand one. It's reasonably expensive, which is really annoying because it's nice. There's a lot of other brands. Some are very, very delicate, so be very, very, very careful when you're opening the package for some, because some are not always shipped with, the best packaging in the world, so it's easy to pull out the box, take out the bag, slip it, drop it, and you just hear the glass crack on the ground, and then you realize you just broke that thing. which I've done. It's very, very annoying. This one's a pretty solid model. Like I said, I had the CO2 burst into the tank and it blew this into its different components and stuff, but it was able to reattach. It's working fine. So definitely a very good sturdy model. I don't remember what brand this is, but usually they'll have pictures on Amazon and you should be able to recognize it. Tons of different brands, models. It just kind of comes down to personal opinion really and what you want to look at. The next thing I want to talk about is going to be the CO2 indicator. Oh gosh, there we go. Now, the CO2 indicators are very helpful. I don't actually have one in this tank. It's a terrible example, and I'm sorry. But I do have the box and some other brands that I recommend. Here's one that's worked out pretty well for me. It's a pretty solid, does, you know, what it's supposed to. CO2 indicator. Oops, there you go. Water plant. Available on Amazon. There's a picture of it actually set up on the box. Here, let's try refocus. There we go. So it's pretty simple. I don't actually have this really bulky looking tag on the next to mine because it's, you know, who wants to look at that? But if you don't have to attach that. That just goes on the outside. It's a very nice CO2 indicator. You fill it up with this solution, you put it in your water, you put it in the tank, and it, you know, it does that. It measures the CO2 in your tank. The problem with these is that they're slow, so it might take a few hours for your CO2 thing to accurately represent the CO2 in your tank, which is why I'd recommend bubble counters, because it's a, you know, you can tell right away how much CO2 you're putting in your tank. This is better for long-term kind of things. You can see whether or not your bubbles per second is enough. A lot of different brands. This one's really nice. It's, you know, pretty solid. It's not super delicate. Cal Aqualabs, they have a lot of good CO2 glassware stuff. I have one of theirs, and it broke on me when I dropped it 2 inches in a sink trying to clean it. So be very, very careful if you get these. It looked really nice. It's fancy looking, so it's kind of fun to have those. But they are very delicate. I'd recommend them. They're very, very nice. And this is typically the equipment I use when I'm setting up my tanks. I hope you found this video helpful. I can go into more detailed processes of how I set up my tanks, talk a bit about the water changes, how I schedule things, when I add fish, when I add shrimp, snails, plants, all that kind of stuff. I can do that in a future video. Thanks for watching. Check out my blog site. Link to that will be in the description of this video, as along with, you know, at least probably 4 or 5 links to different products that I'd recommend using for your tanks that are all available in the United States pretty regularly. So thanks for watching, and bye.